I used to have this boss, and he would say things like, Scott, you need to get out there and you need to happen to something. It sort of stuck in my head. And later on, it's like, yeah, that's the way that I want to live my life. I want to happen to things as opposed to allowing things to happen to me. You really can truly influence a lot more about your path, your journey, than you think you can.
Let's go. Hello and welcome to the Brand New You Show, the podcast dedicated to helping you build your personal brand. We meet here each week to learn how building your brand can help you grow your influence, amplify your reputation, and ultimately impact your career. I'm your host, Ryan Roten, and today I welcome to the show someone who has done just that. Scott Anthony Barlow is the founder of HappenToYourCareer.com. At Happen to Your Career, Scott helps business professionals stop doing work that doesn't fit, figure out what does, and then strives to make it happen within their careers. Scott has been helping people develop their careers and businesses for over 10 years as a human resources leader, business development expert, and career coach. He is also a podcaster with 2 successful podcasts, the What Fits You audio course and the Happen to Your Career podcast. His ultimate goal is to help you find those aha moments so you can take control of your career journey and begin living a life that is unapologetically you. So without any further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce to you the man with the perfect podcasting voice, Scott. Welcome to the Brand New You Show.
Well, now I feel a lot of pressure to have the perfect podcasting voice. That's quite the intro. I really appreciate that. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. I'm glad to have you here. It's been a long time coming. I've been following what you've been doing online for a long time. And in a lot of ways, you've been my long distance mentor.
Well, I sure appreciate you watching and listening and everything. That's awesome.
Well, it's good stuff. And I think everybody who is listening today will agree when they're finished listening that it is very good stuff. And they're going to head over and they're going to check out your website and sign up for your course. But before we get into any of that, I do have one question I like to ask all of my guests as we get started, which is, if you could vacation in only one place for the rest of your vacation days, where would you go?
That is actually a really great question on so many different levels, because I think it probably tells you a lot about the person to some degree. I think, I'm the type of person that loves change and new things and everything like that. I'm a weirdo like that. So that's such a hard question for me to answer too, which is probably why I was stalling for time. How about Europe? Can that be a place?
Well, I've not had somebody pick an entire continent before. A country, but not a continent.
I'll be your first, because I think there's enough things there where I could spend the rest of my days, every vacation whatsoever, getting into trouble and finding stuff out. So I think that would be good.
All right, Europe it is. We'll have to find some kind of theme music for Europe and inject it here. Now, Scott, you up until recently, you were a corporate citizen.
Yeah.
And you just recently left to go full-time now with your business, HappenToYourCareer.com. And by the way, congratulations for that.
Thank you. It's been a ton of fun. It's been a long time coming.
As you were climbing the corporate ladder, I noticed that your career path was very much, one of a higher achiever, somebody who's moving up, getting promoted every so often. And so, most people that would be good enough. But something inside you said, you know what, I got a different path to go down. So how did you get to that point?
You know what? I think it's been a progression. So it didn't necessarily happen just with the last couple of years. Really, all of that started way back, I would say even in college, because I was the type of person that I changed majors 7, 8, 9 times. I don't even remember what it was. It was so many. And I really had no idea what it was that I wanted to do. And after I graduated, I ended up taking the very first job that was available to me. I mean, it was good paying and, there was a whole bunch of good things about it. But for me, I sort of knew from the very beginning that it wasn't going to be particularly exciting for me, and it wasn't, going to line up very, very well. And everybody else is like, "Oh man, you got to take this. It's great. The opportunity is right there. It's in front of you. All of these things." So everybody's encouraged me to go that direction. So I went into the job, and for a while it was fun. I was getting to learn some new stuff, but then got close to about 12 months or so going by, and I found that every single week in, week out, I was having like all kinds of anxiety and apprehension, like to the point where I was driving on my hour commute, down the highway to Portland, Oregon, and I was having like anxiety attacks. Like I'm freaking out along the way. It's like, okay,
It's not good.
No, not at all. And it's like, is this really all there is? Is this how it's supposed to be? And I'd really convinced myself that this is what work was like. And, to the point where on Sunday nights, like I instantly turned into, I was a pretty big jerk to my wife, as much as I'm kind of not really ashamed to say it, but sad to say it. Because I was so not looking forward to Mondays. I'd stay up late on Monday nights and watch reruns of HGTV, hoping that I could, somehow make Monday mornings go away. So it was really, really bad, right?
Did that ever work, by the way? Did the Monday mornings go away?
For the amount of times I did it, you'd think you'd think it was going to work, but I'm the type of person who has to touch the burner, like, I don't know, 52 times apparently. So all that was going on, and I finally decided, look, this cannot continue to happen. This is ridiculous. This is impacting my health. I think I gained a whole bunch of weight, and I just felt like crap all the time. And so I went and talked to my boss. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go talk to my boss. This is not good. I'm not sitting on this anymore. I went and told him that I'm not sure that I should have taken the job. I'm really sorry. I'm not sure that I should take it. I don't know if this is right for me. And apparently he thought the same thing, because 3 weeks later he fired me. So I didn't know I was asking for that at the time. I just was trying to be real. I don't know. I don't know what I was doing, but
it speaks though to corporate politics though. And that's that thing. I think that nebulous thing that people really get frustrated with. They don't understand how to work in that environment. And it's not something you can touch and feel, but it's a real thing that people have to learn to deal and cope with.
It is.
And even if you can, I still think personally that it still pushes on you constantly all the time. When you go and sit in a room now, that you can't say those things directly to your boss, even though he may say, you guys can tell me anything you want, or she may say, go ahead and be as honest as you want. You just don't feel like you can. And I think that's where this whole employee engagement thing for companies really gets lost on some of their leadership, is they don't understand this corporate politics game that takes place and how it really impacts all the employees around them.
Yeah, I think you're right on a lot of different levels. But I think over the next number of years, I kind of went through this process where it actually immediately after that, after I got fired, and spent a couple of days really just kind of moping on the couch and being worried about what my wife thinks and that I've disappointed her and all these sorts of things, I ended up making a decision and kind of swearing off that, look, I'm never going to do work again that I really don't enjoy, and where I feel like that there's that constant pressure there. But one of the things I realized is I own a whole bunch of that, not necessarily the corporations. There's plenty of corporations that are crappy out there, and there's also plenty of good corporations, and same thing for leaders too. And everybody's probably heard all the stats on how much your boss impacts your decision to stay or go, and blah blah blah, all that sort of thing. But I do believe that I personally owned a whole bunch of that. So I started thinking about it from the standpoint of, how can I really understand enough about myself and my strengths and what I bring to the table and all those sorts of things to be able to be myself within the jobs that I went and take. And on the flip side of that, how can I not take jobs that don't allow me to be myself, either because of the environment or because I don't fit in or because of any number of other reasons? And there's a lot of layers to that, right? So that's the way that I started thinking about it. And what I realized is that you can still be true to yourself and at the exact same time be helpful and productive and communicate in ways that represent you and are helpful to the other person or other people at the exact same time. That's a lot harder to do, and it takes a lot of ownership for yourself, though.
As you're going through this thought process and you're starting to ask a lot of these questions, how much of those questions and your personal, we'll say, mindset starting to change now, how much of that happened to your career?
A whole bunch. So the thing I didn't tell you about my story, if you even go further back into college, is that I owned a small business, and that's what put me through college. And truly doing that, it gave me a different outlook and a different mentality. And when I went into sort of a corporate structure, I still maintained a lot of those exact same, hey, look, I own this. I can get this done. I just have to figure out how to get this done. Because that's what my first business did for me. It put me in some really unique situations and uncomfortable situations where I had to like figure out my way out of it, without going into tons of detail and sharing like stories that are probably going to take 8 hours. It really did. It backed me into corners where like, I had payroll to, because at one point I had like 25 employees. And I remember one month where I hadn't collected from a couple of owners. We did contracting and painting and remodels and stuff like that. And, I had 25 employees and I had to make the payroll. So I had to get the stuff in on time. So then, I was backed up against corners. Like, how am I going to collect these paychecks? How are we going to finish these last couple of jobs, collect the paychecks from the homeowners, and then do all the whole host of other stuff in order to make sure that I can get my team members, my employees, their pay on time, because I was committed to that. And that is not a comfortable situation to be in. That scared the living crap out of me, to be quite honest. But doing that and seeing that made me realize that I have a lot more control and a lot more influence over most things than what I ever thought before and what most people realize. And that's it's not necessarily apparent, but this is where the kind of name of the company came from. When I started looking at names, and it was just a blog at the time, I knew I was going to turn it into a business, but I was starting to look at, well, okay, so how can we pick a meaningful name? And, I started looking at the word behind career. And career, really, if you look at the root words, carreria and charis, and I'm probably saying that last one wrong, but the Latin and French and blah, 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 not to get too nerdy on you. But it comes from the root words of like path or journey or, even the same stuff that carriage has, right? Okay, well, that makes sense. Path or journey that everybody's on, blah, 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 whatever. But then how do I help people actually take control of that? So that's where the happen to actually came from too. I used to have this boss when I when I worked at another job, and this was at Radio Shack, believe it or not. And he would, occasionally catch me come stocking stuff in the back room, not up front where I should be. And he'd run into the back room and say things like, "Scott, what are you doing back here? You need to get out there and you need to happen to something." That kind of stuck in my head because I really don't think he was meaning to impart any kind of life advice at the time. But I really, I heard that enough times because I was screwing stuff up. It sort of stuck in my head. And later on, it's like, yeah, that's the way that I want to live my life. I want to happen to things as opposed to allowing things to happen to me. So that's kind of where we carried that whole attitude much, much, much later on, is you really can truly influence a lot more about your path, your journey, than you think you can.
A lot of people get into this rut where they let things happen to them instead of realizing that they really control the situation, especially older, we'll say mid-career or senior or seasoned veterans of the corporate environment. They've put in 20 plus years. You get to this point where you kind of feel like, well, I've got a mortgage, I'm making good money, I have all these things. So I'd really like to go do something else, but I can't. I can't. And they choose to not happen to their career. They choose to let their career happen to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's exactly how it happens. That's such a good example too, because, and that's actually to some degree what happened to me. We had a ton of debt. We had like 6 figures worth of debt and a house that was underwater and all that sort of thing. And that's part of what caused me to stay in that other job so long, honestly. And later on, even when we realized that, hey, look, this can't be here, it's not an easy road to take control of that and say, look, here's what I'm going to do. We're going to pay off 6 figures worth of debt. We're going to not buy Tupperware, even though we got crappy Tupperware in the cupboard and small things like that. We're going to make the decision to not do that. I'm going to go have really, challenging conversations with my boss and ask for $25,000 raises and things along those lines. And I'm going to look for ways to add value to the company that are worth that and more. And like that stuff is not easy, but it is totally worth it. And one allows you to be able to, as you said, happen to it versus have it happen to you.
We get to this point in our careers where we start to question decisions we've made in the past, or maybe we just kind of get burnt out doing the same things over and over, because even if you get promoted up and up, you still kind of deal with a lot of the same stuff. And so all of us get to this point where we really need to figure out what fits. And one of the things that you guys offer at Happen to Your Career is an 8-day email course called Figure It Out. How did you come up with the content and what goes into the 8-day mini course that you offer?
This was kind of the culmination of the process that I went through and I invented, because even after I even after I, got fired from my job and my boss said, see ya, I went to a series of jobs that were actually a ton of fun for me. But then also, after I was in them for years, I realized that some of my needs and wants and things like that had changed. And I, at some point, started realizing, okay, look, what was good for me then doesn't necessarily work for me anymore. And I started seeking, okay, so how can I figure out what actually does fit me, both right now and then over the longer term too? And then that led me to questions like, okay, so what do I actually want out of my life? Like, not to get too philosophical too quickly here, but really, truly, I started reading a bunch of different books, and I started, trying to get my hands on any kind of information that I possibly could about this sort of thing, because I was fascinated by it. I was fascinated by, not just how do you do this? How do you figure out what you want? But also, how does it work both psychologically and, practically and everything in between? So I ended up, out of necessity, creating this type of process for myself. And then that process is literally what we carried forward, because after I created it for myself and after I made a couple other career changes, I started meeting with people. Like they would hear my story and they'd be like, how did you do that? How did you decide that you wanted to do that and make that change over here? And like, they would offer to buy me coffee and I would just talk, and it's like, okay, this is awesome. All right. Yeah. I'll take your Americano, and like, you listen to me tell stories. Okay, sweet. And that's where I started realizing two things, really. One, that this type of process that we had started creating just for myself, or I had started creating just for myself, was actually helpful to other people. And then at the exact same time, I realized, hey, this could actually be a thing. Like, this could be a business, as I started looking at what I really wanted later on too.
Who do you recommend takes the course? I mean, what are the types of people that you find sign up for your course? What is it that they are struggling with or starting to ask questions about in their own careers that makes them say, I need to figure out what fits?
Yeah, that's such a great question. There's really a number of different people. So if you've been going into your job for months at a time, and kind of there's been something in the either back of your mind or the pit of your stomach, and you've realized that I don't know if this really lines up anymore, or you are in that stuck feeling like you were talking about earlier, and you felt that for more than just a couple of days. Or here's what a lot of people say: I've come to realize, I've been in my job for a while, or I've been in a couple of jobs, and I've realized that what I got into way back when, what I fell into, really is kind of the polar opposite of what I think I should be doing, but I don't fully understand what that is. So people who don't know where to begin, but know that they want to be doing something else, this course is perfect for them, and it gets them started down that path right away.
So how do people get started? We can sign up for your course, but what's like one of the first things that we're going to have people do to help them understand how they can start to look at themselves differently and figure out what fits?
Let me kind of tell you a story to help put the process in perspective. I was looking for a good analogy for a long time, but one day, my son, who was like 2.5 at the time, Grayson, he was building a puzzle. Like, he had this puzzle and it's like a 40-piece puzzle or something like that. And he shook it all out on the floor and accidentally sat on the box and all kinds of stuff like that. And he's grabbing at pieces. He's like taking all these different pieces and he's like cramming them together, just trying to force them together. And of course, it's not working at all. I sat there and I watched him for a bit. And I eventually okay, I got to show this kid like how to put together a puzzle. This is crazy. So I started showing him like, hey, if you just find these corner pieces, like those are pretty easy to identify. You pull out the corner pieces and you got 4 of those if it's square or rectangular puzzle, right? So then once you've got those corner pieces, then you can pull out all of the edge pieces. And those edge pieces also pretty easy to identify, of course. And then once you've got all those edge pieces out, you can sort of figure out that, the right colors match up over here. And then you can put together this frame. Now, the funny thing is, once you've got the frame put together on the puzzle, then you can start to see what the picture is, even if Grayson had sat on the box and totally destroyed it. And, you can't see what the picture on the box is anymore. You can start to see that, hey, Donald Duck's foot is over here, or, Mickey Mouse's ear is over here, or something like that. And we got a lot of Disney puzzles at our house, but you can start to see that picture even before you actually have the picture filled in. And the funny thing is, most people, as they're trying to identify like what's good for them in their careers, they're doing the exact same thing that Grayson was trying to put together that puzzle. They're grabbing at like random pieces and trying to force them together and make them fit. Then they're shocked when they don't fit. So instead, what we do is we guide people through this same puzzle, putting together a puzzle type process. And we take the corner pieces, which we look at as your signature strengths, which really is just that unique combination of skills and experiences and predispositions and preferences and interests and things that you're excited about. And, some of those natural gifts too. That combination put together really allows you to be better at that set of stuff than almost anyone else.
Lisa Cummings would agree with you as well. I've had Lisa on the show. Lisa's a big strengths fan. Let me ask you this, because some people listening are in a corporate position. We don't really focus on our strengths in corporate. We focus on our weaknesses and what we're doing bad or what we could do better. So why wouldn't you start with your weaknesses instead of, why focus on strengths?
Oh, man. That question makes me angry. Not like really angry, but it gets me riled up because it is such a problem. It really, really, truly is. And it's mostly just because people don't understand how it works. And, you've got a podcast, so you understand the power of media, you could say. But I've got a podcast as well, the Happy to Your Career podcast. And one of the cool things that's afforded me is I get to talk to lots and lots and lots of people that are successful by their definition and not by somebody else's definition. And that's one of the things that we look for in a lot of our guests. But what I've found again and again and again is those people have implicitly clear ideas of what their strengths are and what they offer of value to the world. They're successful because of that, not because they spent a whole bunch of time like trying to make something that they suck at a little bit better. And yeah, so if you're successful, it's going to be because of your strengths, not because you've done a great job minimizing your weaknesses.
I agree with you. I think we spend too much time trying to get people to be good at things that they're not naturally born to do versus getting them focused and pointed in a direction where they can really shine and do the best job that they can because they're made to do that.
Now, the funny thing is, once you combine this with the second step of the process that we're talking about here, it starts to really give you a whole bunch more control so that you can help dictate that in organizations. Because hiring as a whole is pretty broken as far as how it works in most organizations. The second piece of that puzzle really, or the second piece of the puzzle method that we're talking about is those edge pieces. And that really is taking your strengths and then combining that with the edge pieces of what it is that you actually want in your life. So you take those two things and exactly what you just talked about too, combine them together, and you've got your strengths, you've got what you actually want in all areas of your life, not just financial, not just environmental or company wise, but also even things like your health and well-being and fitness and whatever else that falls into that category. Even relationships, like who do you actually want to be surrounded by? So we'll get people pretty deep into defining what all of these things are. And then that creates this framework. And just like that puzzle that we were talking about with Grayson, once you got the frame, you can actually start to see what the picture looks like for you. But until you have that frame, it is really difficult to see what the picture looks like. And everybody wants to see the picture before they actually go through the frame. Everybody's like, well, I just want to see the end. Like, put me to the end, but they don't want to do the work to be able to get to what the end looks like.
Yep. I see the exact same thing. Everybody wants to jump to, I want to build a website. I want to boost my LinkedIn profile. What do I put in my social media accounts? It's like, well, hold on. Let's talk about what do you even want to be known for? Because once we define that, all the other stuff becomes so much easier. But without the corners and the edge pieces, you've got no picture.
Same concept. Yeah.
So let me jump back for a minute. Go back to the corners. How does somebody identify their strengths? How do they know what they're naturally strong at?
Oh man, there's a lot of different ways, and there's no one right way. So I want to be very clear that there's not a magic bullet. So Lisa would certainly guide you towards Strength Finder 2.0. Which is an awesome resource. What you'll find is it does a really, really, really good job helping you provide verbiage to some of your natural strengths and natural gifts. What it doesn't do is it doesn't help you understand how to apply those. So as long as you go into that can be a great resource to help you skip ahead without doing a whole bunch of identification work and really provide some verbiage. I have a lot of clients that are like, what is this witchcraft you have me do? It knows me exactly. It's fairly accurate. So that can be a resource. Some other things that we do, and this is something that literally anybody can do to start to identify their strengths, just make a list of each of your jobs or roles or volunteer work or businesses or whatever it is that you've been involved with for different type of vocation. And then what I want everybody to do is be able to start listing underneath each of those what you really enjoyed out of that. And you might have hated the job as a whole, but there's probably something that you really enjoyed out of that. And then you can do that for each job or project or whatever it happened to be for you. And then at the same time, I want you to go back to each one and say, okay, so what did you find that compared to other people, you were just a little bit better at and came easier to you? And what often happens just from doing that exercise, it forces you to look at it a different way. Because if I ask you, what are your strengths? You're going to say, well, I'm a good communicator. And I'm like, okay, like 9 out of 10 people say that. Okay, so what does that actually mean? Does that mean that you are an amazing writer and you can leverage words in ways that other people can't? Does it mean that you can communicate auditorily? Does it mean that, there's a lot of different things, but once you get down to the nitty gritty, what I find is that people really understand these surface level strengths. These very, very, very surface level strengths. Things like, oh, I'm good with people. Oh, I build relationships really well, or whatever else. But when I work with people, we'll get 5 or 6 levels deeper and address what is that underlying current that runs across all the places where their strengths come out, and then really diagnose what exactly that is. So like I had a coaching client just the other day, and we were talking through it, and he had all of these different strengths, and he's saying, like, I absolutely love interacting with people and giving people advice. And he's saying things like, I really, really find it very, very easy to build relationships with people. People trust me very, very easily. And so we started digging under the surface, and there's all these vehicles where it was coming out. Like, he likes entertaining. Like, he would love having people come over to his house and cooking for them and entertaining. And there were 6 or 7 other places where he's like, I want to do more of this. But really, it was the vehicle, not necessarily the strength. It was the strength coming out in that vehicle. But once we got 5 or 6 layers under the surface, we realized that really what he is amazing at is being able to cultivate really emotional experiences. And really what that means is he's able to help people elicit emotion and focus on the overall experience, even if it's just a single conversation. And that doesn't sound like much, but that is something that he is probably better than 99% of the other people on the planet. And this runs through everything. And as we layered it down, we looked at all of these different vehicles, like I was talking about, the same current was right underneath there for every single one. It's like, this is really what is actually driving you, causing you to be good at all of these other things, not the thing itself.
What is an anti-strength?
An anti-strength really is the reason that they're not particularly great in one area because they are particularly great in another area. So let me give you an example. For me, I'm very future focused, and I very much love to talk about things that have depth. And that's how I love to connect with people. And that's a strength on one side, but the downside to that, it is really, really, really difficult for me to be able to focus on the here and now. And that's extremely difficult for me, even more so than the average person. It is just the byproduct of your strength. And when you put it in terms of that, then all of a sudden it becomes something that you can not just live with, but you can really thrive with if you understand how it works, versus feeling guilty or like I'm terrible in this one particular area or whatever it is.
So once you know your strengths, how do you start to assess which positions or what direction do I want to take them now for my career? Maybe you're doing a job that currently is not highlighting your strengths. So how do you identify a position or a place to move to that says, okay, this is going to help me use my strengths, maybe not 100% of the time, but the majority of the time?
I think that is one of the hardest parts for people, because people only know what they've been exposed to. So a lot of times, even if you have done a really, really great job of understanding what it is that you're great at, and then at the same time, understanding what you want in your life, then some people will get caught up there from, okay, so how do I actually connect that to something that earns me money, right?
Right, exactly.
For other people, what happens is if they have been exposed to different types of ways to earn money that happen to line up with those things that they want and what they're great at, then it becomes very obvious to them. So usually this becomes like a fork in the road type moment. And so for example, what I mean is that the person who's already been exposed to something, then it's like, oh, well, I can just rule out all this other stuff that doesn't fit what I'm actually looking for, and I can not pay attention to it any longer. And then it's sort of like this relief to them. And then they can just start immediately going after what it is that fits them. But for the other person, where the other person is in the place where it's like, okay, so I got these strengths. That's awesome. I feel pretty good about that. And I know, here's some of the stuff that I want in my life, but I really don't know how to attach it to something that still puts food on the table for my family or whatever. What that still does for them is now they can actually be paying attention to it in a completely different way. Here's an example where that was the case for me. I wanted to do something in the career space when I sort of thought about starting this business, but I really didn't know exactly what it was or what the business was going to look like or anything else along those lines. But after I'd gone through this process that I created for myself, I think it was within 48 hours. It might have been the very next day. I got this email. This email said something like, hey, we're recruiting for speakers in Seattle, Washington, and we want somebody to come and talk about careers. And I'd lined up a couple of different things. It's like, okay, well, here's my strengths, and here's a couple of things that I want in my life. And one of those things that I wanted was I wanted to be able to help people with their careers in some capacity. I didn't even fully know what at that point. But then if you would have asked me a week before that, before I made that decision and before I had some of those discoveries, I guess you could call it, I would have just let that email go right on by, because it's a 3.5-hour drive to Seattle. And I wasn't going to get paid for this. But what happened is, because I'd had some of these realizations, I didn't. And I responded and said, hey, I can help people with their careers, and sent this kind of probably not so professional but kind of sloppy email back to them, and they're like, oh yeah, well, we need somebody. Okay, so I ended up going over to Seattle and doing the event, and I ended up talking to, I think it's like 50 or 60 people, and I ended up calling Alyssa later on that day and saying, hey, this is the type of thing I'm supposed to be doing. Like it felt amazing, and then all of a sudden I had additional exposure to something else that got me a little bit further down the path of what it could look like.
How important is the difference between knowing what you want versus knowing what you don't want as far as this process goes?
I'm laughing only because you either are incredibly intelligent or do incredibly good research. And either way, I think is a compliment to you. Or both. It could be both.
Which do you prefer? I'll be that one.
Okay. I like both. I like and answers rather than or. So dual compliments to you. But everybody, for the most part, can share what it is they don't want. Everybody knows that here's what I don't like about my current job. I don't like the boss. I don't like the schedule. I don't like I don't like whatever it happens to be. I don't like the fact that I can't make it to my daughter's play on Tuesday during the middle of the day, or I don't like the fact that the work I'm doing, doesn't relate to the things that I'm personally interested in. It's easy to call that stuff out. Instead, just like we were talking about a little bit earlier, due to exposure and a few other things, it's a lot harder to say, here's what I actually do want. And we talked a little bit about, asking that question earlier of, hey, if I ask people, what do you want? Most people can't answer that. Or they turn it around and say, I'll tell you what I want, Scott. Here's what I want. I don't want my boss to come into my cubicle, and I don't want him to demand that, I've got to have this happen by this time. And yeah, that's what I want. That's what and I don't want the schedule that I have too. Yeah, I'll tell you what I want. And that's how a lot of people will unintentionally answer it. They'll get down that track and that road. And
yeah, that sounds very similar to a conversation that Olivia Gamber and I had about her process, where, if you don't know what you want, it's difficult for you to relate that to other people for them to be able to help you. And so if you assume that people can come up with, this is what they want, then at some point they're making some type of decision. How important is it during this process for someone to make a decision and say, this is what I want, this is what I'm going to do?
It is incredibly important, but primarily from a couple of standpoints. One, decision creates commitment on some level. And until you can decide or make a decision, you can't have any action on it, really. Not any action that actually matters. So, and by the way, let's not omit the fact that even deciding not to decide is actually still a decision, but it's one that doesn't take you very far. But once you have a decision, that does truly allow you to move forward and take the next step. And then that gives you the commitment to actually move through the hard part of whatever process, however small, even if it's like deciding where to go to dinner that night. And yeah, I mean, it's like, that's how ridiculous we make some stuff in our heads. And that happens all the time. And it's especially blown out of proportion when people think that your entire life depends on one particular decision, which it really doesn't, regarding your career.
Right. Yeah. It reminds me of a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson. Once you make a decision, the universe conspires to make it happen. Do people need some type of decision filter to be able to help them process through this information?
I really look at the type of process that we just went through and described with the puzzle method. That really, in my opinion, is what can create a filter for you. I got the term filter from a couple of my customers. They all said the exact same thing. They're like, oh, that really helps me filter through this. And I'm like, oh, after I heard it twice, because I have to get hit over the head with stuff a couple of times before I recognize a good idea. Yeah.
Me too.
But, a couple of people said that, and it's like, yeah, that's really what it actually does. It helps you go through and sort of objectively say, yeah, that it meets this piece of my life that I want, and it meets these other piece, and it gives me this, flexibility that I'm looking for, and it gives me all of these other things. Or no, it doesn't. Okay, well, I don't even have to worry about it. I'm not going to apply to it. I'm not going to call anybody about it. I'm just not going to worry about it. And it takes this really emotional process and makes it much, much more objective, and allows you to, one, as you pointed out, you have to have an idea of what you want. And it also allows you to actually act only on the stuff that you want.
Yeah. And those decisions, the filter that we're talking about, those are the decisions that we make when we're talking about what do we want to do with our life, right? So environment, financial, family growth, personal growth, health, all that. Yes. So you make those decisions and say, these are the things I want. And then anytime opportunity presents itself to you, you have a filter now to say, you know what, it doesn't meet all these buckets. I'm out.
Yes.
Or it does, and I'm in.
Well, and here's a great way. Here's an even third alternative too. So I had one client. His name is Jared, and we did all the upfront work and helped him create this filter. And he did a phenomenal job with it. It was really challenging for him, but he did it. And then we started helping connect him to different types of job opportunities. Well, he got an offer, I guess I should say, that lined up with like 80% of what he was looking for. And as we went through the filter, he called me up and he's like, hey, they made the offer, and I'm wondering if I should just pass because it doesn't look like it lines up in a lot of these areas. And I said, Jared, but it does line up in all these other areas that you want. It's working with the type of people that you want to work with. It's working in the types of industries that you're really interested in and have a high degree of expertise. It's going to allow you to do public speaking. It's all of these different things that he was looking for at the time. And let's talk about the conversations that you can have with them and be just very straightforward with them in a way that you're also grateful for the opportunity, and just describe to them what you actually do want in the areas where it's not meeting and what you would like instead. And he did that. And it resulted in probably 5 or 6 more conversations back and forth. And ultimately, they offered him the job. Originally, it was like, I can't remember the exact amounts or anything like that, but it was like $50,000 or something. And he wanted quite a bit more than that. And it was going to be more travel than what he was looking for. It's like way more travel than what he's going to be looking for. They ended up changing the job for him and giving him the amount of money that he wanted in the first place. Like when he and I sat down at the very, very beginning and I said, hey, how much money are you looking for? He's like, well, it would be nice to hit this. And he threw that number at me. They gave him that amount of money, all because he had done the upfront work in understanding what he really wanted and then was willing to ask it once it got to that point.
Reminds me of the quote, if you're not willing to ask, don't expect people to act.
Exactly.
All right, Scott, let's talk about happened to your career. We touched on this briefly at the very beginning. How would you describe happened to your career to someone who comes to you for the first time?
So what we really do is we just help people figure out what they actually want, and then we help them go and make that happen. And that's it. So ultimately, it's all around career changes. We just help people make those big, massive life career changes. And that's it. That's what we do. When we do that through courses and training and class type structure, and even one-on-one help too at the same time. So we've got a lot of different lot of different ways that we do that with people.
Yeah. And so you mentioned earlier, you've got an online community, members only online community. Is that part of your Facebook group? Is that like a private Facebook group, or is the Facebook group different?
We've got a couple of different Facebook groups. So we've got a closed community that I would invite anybody who's interested in this type of stuff to. And the best way that you can get access to that is that 8-day course that we talked about earlier. We've got that set up especially for your listeners. And that link is happentoyourcareer.com/brand-new-you. And they can go over there and they can get that for free. This takes people through that process that we were describing earlier. So this would be for people who are struggling to figure out what it is that they want to do and do want to make a career change, but don't know exactly what it is that they want to do. Anyhow, one of the first emails that you're going to get will invite you to the Facebook group, and then you can get that additional level of support too.
Now, you also have, as a part of your Happen to Your Career brand, you have a podcast called Happen to Your Career. So can you talk a little bit about the podcast? Who is it? Who are the types of people you interview? How often does it come out?
Yeah, it comes out every single Monday, and somehow we've managed to get, well over 100 episodes. I don't even know how many at this point.
110.
Yeah, so we've got, well over 100 interviews, and we will interview, we'll bring people onto the show that either have expertise in helping people live the type of life that they really actually want to, especially regarding their careers, or we'll bring on people that have really just amazing stories where they've done that themselves, or people who have been listeners to the show or worked with Happen to Your Career. And then we'll showcase a lot of our customer stories too. And those are some of the most fun ones for me, to be quite honest.
For the listeners who do want to learn more, you've already given us one link. Are there any other ways that any of the listeners can get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So you can certainly go over to happentoyourcareer.com, and you can find out more about what we do there and connect with me, connect with the team, connect with other people at the same time that are in a similar type place that you are and wanting to do some of the same types of things and make those career changes. But truly, I think the best way for you to connect is that course, because that'll help give you a really good head start on understanding who we are, what we do, and then at the same time, get you some of the tools that'll be really useful for you. So I got to say this before we go too far, though. I've been on, I don't know, well over 100 podcasts at this point, and you are top 10% easily, maybe top 5%, maybe even higher than that on doing your prep work. Nice job, sir. You're phenomenal at this.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And with that, do you have any final thoughts or words of wisdom, tips, that type of thing that you'd like to pass on to anybody that's listening today?
I know we spent a lot of our time on it, and this might sound a little bit redundant, but at the risk of being redundant, I really do honestly believe, based on all of the people that are successful by their own right that I've had the opportunity to meet or interact with or work with, even as clients in a number of cases, where they've defined their own success and they've actually been able to live that in their life. All of those people have done the hard work of understanding what they're great at and figuring out what they want in their life. So I would absolutely wholeheartedly advise you to do that work up front. It's well worth it. So hard. Most people are never going to do it, but what's on the other side of that is just downright phenomenal.
If you really want to change your career, if you really want to happen to your career, you have to do the hard work. There's just no way around it. Okay, Scott, thank you very much. I appreciate you being on the show today. It has been absolutely my pleasure, and look forward to staying in touch with you.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate you having me on.
So what about you? Do you know what you want from your life and your career? Think about the question for a minute. It's a hard one to answer, but as Scott said, once you can answer this question, you will be well on your way to happening to your career. Thank you, Scott, for being a guest on the show today, for sharing your career journey and reminding us that we do, in fact, have more control over our careers than we think we do. And for you, the listener, thank you for tuning in today. Knowing that you're out there tuning in each and every week encourages me to continue to happen to this podcast. If you're new to the show or even a longtime listener, don't forget this is a podcast, which means you can subscribe to the show and have each week's episode delivered right to your favorite phone or pod catcher. If you're struggling to figure out what fits, head on over to happentoyourcareer.com/brand-new-you. Take Scott's course and start putting together the puzzle that is your life and your career. One last thing before I sign off this week. This past week, Pat Flynn from Smart Passive Income released his second book titled Will It Fly? The book is about helping you figure out how to test out your next business idea so you don't waste your time or your money. Since Pat has been a long-distance mentor of mine for a long time now, I picked up an extra copy of his book, which I will send to the first person who sends an email to me at ry@nrhoten.com with the subject line, Will It Fly? That email address again is ry@nrhoten.com with the subject line, Will It Fly? Good luck. That wraps us up for today. The show notes can be found on the website at ryanroten.com/Scott Barlow. Until next week, I've been Ryan, and I'm out. Today's show was edited and produced by Ryan Roten. The outro music and transition music is the Balkan Accordion Loop by Martyr Harvey. The intro music is Pulse by Soundroad.